I tell you not for your comfort, yea, not for your desire, save that the sky grows darker yet, and the sea rises higher. G.K. Chesterton. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I'm your host. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this week. I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you've been listening, I hope you've enjoyed the prior episodes. If this is your first time, please feel free to like, subscribe, download, all that good stuff. And if you did not listen to last week's episode, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it, because this one is kind of a direct extension of that one, kind of like a part 2. Also, this may be a little bit shorter, just because I traveled a little bit this weekend, and I'm just a little tired. But I am going to try to give you guys a good 30 minutes, hopefully, but it might be slightly less than that. But let's go ahead and get into the meat of this episode. We will be remaining in Southeast Asia, but we're going to be shifting most of our focus to what are today the island nations in the region, with a little bit of a callback to the mainland. And to start that process, I'm just going to remind and reiterate that the exact sea levels for this period of time, 8,000 to 6,000 BCE, are not exactly known, or they're not agreed upon by scientists. Though we do know for sure that for a sizable portion of the Homo sapien habitation or migration of this region, these lands were not, littoral in nature. What are today, numerous islands, both small and massive, they were all a connected landmass that is referred to as Sunda or Sunda land. Now, again, there is some debate and argument about the exact point the modern sea level range kind of arose in this region. Now, at the start of our current season, 8,000 BC, the process is well underway, and every generation of humans in the area would have to deal with steadily rising tides. Now, some say that the levels had stabilized by the end of our current time frame, but others argue that this is a slow process that will continue till about 5,000 BC, so about 1,000 years after our current focus ends. Regardless of whatever difficulties these environmental challenges posed, these changes were incremental enough that the humans living here were able to adapt, and they did so quite well. Though I think it should go without saying that these changes, as well as the tropical environment, has negatively impacted what material we can find about the humans living in the region. Now, with that out of the way, let's return to what is modern-day Malaysia. Now, for those of you that don't know, the modern country of Malaysia is not contiguous. It contains most of the Malay Peninsula, which is kind of extended south, or the southern part of Thailand. But it also controls lands to the north and west of the island of Borneo. And this is the third largest island in the world and rests almost in the middle of mainland Southeast Asia, which, you have the Philippines kind of to the north and east of it, and then you have Java, Sulawesi, etc. To its kind of like along its south and east. Now, Indonesia and Brunei also control lands on this island. In fact, the name comes to us in English as a likely corruption of the name Brunei. Of course, the English learned about, I believe, the island from the Spanish initially, or the Spanish or the Portuguese, and it was probably something that they just picked up from them. At one point, the Sultanate of Brunei controlled all of the island's coasts and a decent bit of the interior, if not all of it not to mention a number of smaller islands around Borneo. Now, that being said, the origin of the name Brunei is not as clear. Though I read an excerpt of a book. I have my notes here. Hold on one second. I know that it was written by a woman named Amelia Lanier. No. She was the translator. I forget the professor's name. I didn't write it down in my notes. It's Devian. Was her surname, but forgive me, I've forgotten her first name. I'll think of it. She's French, and I vaguely remember it was hyphenated, so I'll keep thinking of that while we go ahead. But it was a very interesting read, and I do recommend it. But the name of the book is Brunei from the Age of Commerce to the 21st Century. Now, she related a story that the name came from the founder of the Sultanate finding the river estuary where he wished to move, and said Baruna, which is Malay. And it can be translated in a few ways, but if in this situation, it would be something like, this is it, or there is the place. There's some more etymological stuff that we'll get to later, but I think the last thing I should highlight when it comes to the island's name is that the Indonesian people that live there, and again, they control most of the island, I think around 3/4 of it, they refer to it as Kalimantan, and this is supposed to derive from the Sanskrit Kalamanthana, and that can be translated as burning weather, which, just due to its tropical nature is, probably where that came from. And if you're wondering how Sanskrit came to be spoken so far from India, we'll get into that later. But it's this region sees a lot of in-migration from outside places that we'll talk about later. Now, on Borneo, the most famous archaeological site is the Nia Caves. And this is located in the Nia National Park. And this is a UNESCO site. And remains in and around the cave cover a very vast time period, with most recent dating to around 3000 BC, and the oldest dating to around 38,000 years ago. And most of the tools show kind of a continual tradition, with standard advancement you would expect to find as time went on. Blades becoming smaller and more specialized, and then, the stone becoming polished and finer, and those styles would become more popular as time goes on. And then, of course, they're all made with local material and with kind of similar local techniques and finishings. And that, of course, shows that they are separate from the Halbenhian culture of the Southeast Asian peninsular mainland. And this shouldn't be surprising due to the ever larger ocean. Now, these people were also apparently very brave hunters. There is evidence that in addition to standard hunter-gatherer type game, smaller animals like wild pigs and boars, they were also hunting tigers, believe it or not. Now, if this was something done actively, or if they just did this when they had the opportunity, say if they came across an injured tiger, or if maybe the animal was asleep or was being distracted by its own kill, they may have taken advantage of it in that situation, but we don't know. Now, there aren't nearly as many tiger bones, obviously, that have been found as other animals. So, again, it's probably not something that is very common that they would do, or at least something that they were probably not always successful at. But whatever the case, the exact nature of the relationship with the tiger at this early time frame, the animal becomes a very powerful symbol on the island. A number of peoples and kingdoms will, make a very big deal of the tiger as a symbol of power or religious prestige, that kind of thing. The Borneo tiger is now also widely thought to be extinct, but there are some native groups on the islands who claim that they still live very deep in the jungles and mountains, and that is something that is possible. This would, of course, be a very small number, as tigers were already very rarely seen just before the Europeans show up in the region. So, they had dwindling numbers, and it's possible they could have already been extinct. No one's ever gotten a picture of it. It wasn't recorded in any kind of European science manuals from those time frames. They weren't recorded the same way, say, like the dodo or the Tasmanian tiger was. This is something that was never very solidly believed. In fact, I think some people even thought it was a myth. But, they found bones. And then there are also Javanese tigers on the island of Java, which is to the southwest of Borneo. They're thought to have been related, and they obviously got kind of separated by the sea in the same way. But yeah, so there may be a missing Bornean tiger somewhere. But I'm kind of getting off track here. So, another prominent site on the island is Sang Kulirong Mangkalihat Karst. And this is a group of caves on a peninsula on the Indonesian side of the island. So these two locations are separated by the island's numerous mountain ranges. They kind of run almost diagonally across the entirety of the island, and it separates Malay, Borneo, Brunei, and Indonesia. In some ways, they still meet on the coast, but it's a very rough terrain, and it's hard to navigate through, even today. So there's a lot of that island that hasn't been explored. It wouldn't surprise me if we run across more of these ancient sites. Mangkalihat has not been added to UNESCO sites yet, although they did submit applications for it to be added. There seems to be a certain level of similarity between the artifacts in the two locations through all the periods of habitation. Karst does not appear to have been occupied quite as long as the Nia caves. It doesn't show use, at least we don't have evidence of use until I think around 3,000 years after the Nia caves see use begin. So not quite as old, but it lasts to around the same time period, which is around 3,000 BC. Now, in terms of who is inhabiting these places, I do want to go back to last week's talk. I just remembered the author's name. Her name is Marie Sibel de, I'm going to butcher her last name, but Vianney. And that is Marie Sibel de Vianney. And she authored Brunei from the Age of Commerce to the 21st century. That was her name. Right. Trying to remember. Oh, yes. So, who is living in this region? Well, I mentioned last week how they had found two sets of remains that actually had usable DNA. And they were... one was found around, I believe, 7,800 BCE, and the other was a little bit later, around 5,000 BC or so. And how they had done genetic testing, and they had found that they were very closely related to a couple of, I guess, what are considered indigenous people by the Malay government. And I made it sound like that just those indigenous hunter-gatherers were related to those people. And I think I mentioned enough, but I don't know if I was 100% clear. So most of the people that are, not immigrating like within the last, couple hundred years, like, so your native indigenous groups, the Malay people themselves, they're all related to those remains that have been found in those regions. It's just a question of how closely related. I think the Malay people themselves, I think on average they share about 10 to 15% of like the DNA, and that's true even of the people on Indonesia as well as Brunei, which the Brunei speak Malay. They are an offshoot. Their country was like founded by a group of political exiles from what is now Malaysia, so there's a lot of genetic overlap between the peoples living in this region. But some have more, I guess, intermarriage or intermixtures with people from either South Asia or East Asia. And we'll talk about more about that later when it happens. But they're all, to some extent or another, descended from these early Negrito ancestors, cousins to the Andamanese. Of the people living on Borneo, I believe that the people that have the most in common with those older DNA strains, they are the Dayak people. And this is, I believe, the largest native group on Borneo. And they occupy places both in what is Malaysian territory and Indonesian territory. I think altogether they make up around 5 million people or so. And they have had a lot of intermixture with Polynesians and South Asians as well as East Asians. So just keep all this in mind. Even though they're descended from these early Negrito people, they've also had a lot more intermixture, say, than the groups I mentioned last time. I believe the Siang and was the primary one. So they are. There are a lot of people who are in the area now that are descended from those original inhabitants. I'm not going to go into too much detail on them just yet because, again, there's a couple of thousand years where they have had a lot of cultural influence. But if we can kind of get some things, I guess, make guesses about these people that may not necessarily have been imported from their interactions with East Asians or South Asians or mainland Southeast Asians, they do have their own traditions and things like that. And we'll go into this a lot more later. I know that there is, they did practice forms of body modification. I think some tribes they have will elongate their earlobes. Although I know that today they use iron bangles to do that. So possibly they were using stones to do that at earlier dates, but it's hard to say when these type of traditions arose. These traditions, in fact, could have arisen as a way to stand out and mark themselves as different from the later inhabitants or settlers to the region. Car backfire, don't worry about that. Yes, but so there are a number of Dayak people, and they, of course, have sub-tribes, but they are, you know, they're a very interesting group as a whole, and I look forward to talking about them later. Now, there are, of course, other large islands in the region. Java is the next, probably most populous, I believe, of the big Southeast Asian islands. No, excuse me, sorry. Java is the most populated of the Southeast Asian islands. It's not nearly as big as Borneo. Borneo is the largest island in Asia, and Java is the most populous. Now, there isn't much in terms of these very old archaeological locations that I was able to read about in Java. I don't know if that's because they haven't really looked up, or they haven't begun like these kind of large scale archaeological surveys. We do have evidence that Homo erectus was obviously on the island. I believe that Java Man, I think, which was I think the first, or no, it's the oldest hominid fossil ever found, and that was, of course, found on Java, and that was in the late 1800s. So, a lot of archaeological research in Java, as far as I'm aware, is kind of dedicated to that very ancient period and those very ancient hominids. It's very probable that a lot of the Homo sapien, early habitation stuff might be underwater in the region now. Just like I'm sure that there's so much lost kind of in that region. But that is not to say that we don't know anything about the island. It's a very rich island in terms of biodiversity, much like Borneo. They have a lot of similar kind of animals. We already talked about tigers, but also there are leopards on both. They all kind of have their own small regional variants. And I think it's safe to say that humans are kind of experiencing the same process in evolution, if socially, if not, biologically. And I think that, these are obviously, this isolation is causing a lot of differences to slowly start to come about. Again, at the start of our time frame, these islands are probably locked off from each other. Of course, the humans there are eating fish and things like that. We don't have a whole lot of evidence of travel between the islands just yet, but that is something that will be happening more and more as time goes on. You'll have travel not just from outside of these islands, but also between them. And Java is a very important place in terms of agriculture for this region. It's very rich. They are able to support a large population. I think over 140, 150 million people live on Java. And so there's a lot of, that you can do to make life habitable here. Despite the fact that, it is just an island. And, like India, a lot of these places are kind of at the mercy of monsoons and things like that. So that is something that these very early human ancestors are having to deal with. And again, these early inhabitants are probably all similarly related to those remains that have been found in Southeast Asia. Just, with a couple of, 10,000 years or so with direct separation. Maybe a little bit of interaction via trade or sailing between the islands, but at least from the period where the sea levels really start to rise until around probably in the next 3,000 years or so after our current time frame, so around 3000 BC. They're more or less probably isolated on these islands with a little bit of interaction, a little bit of sailing, and then there's going to be kind of an explosion of travel and colonization and settlement from other regions. And that's something that we'll get into, this kind of, again, interactions between agricultural groups and these traditional human hunter-gatherer groups. Let's see. Java, Borneo, those are the main islands to talk about. The other islands in the region are important as well. I couldn't find, again, any record of any kind of archaeological surveys that cover our current time frame, so I'll kind of not worry about them for now. But trying to think if there was anything else. I guess I can go over the etymology of Java. This is one that's a little bit more mysterious. There's a couple of theories. One is that the island was named after Jawa Wut, which is a plant that was supposed to have grown on the island right around the time that the Indians from the subcontinent began to kind of seek out trade with the location. So it's just prior to Indianization. There are those that say that it had different names. It's possible it could be related to the word Jiao or Jav, and it basically meant distant. Or it could be related to the Sanskrit Yava, which means barley, which the island was very famous for growing at certain periods. And in fact, Yavadvipa is mentioned in the Ramayana, and it's a very kind of it's tied up in this mythological story where Rama is looking for Sita, his wife, and it's kind of a reference to that. That Java may have been the island that shows up in certain parts of the Ramayana, which we talked about that in Sri Lanka. Rama goes to a few different places in search of Sita, his wife, and there are several places that are given that name due to the similarities with the story and the actual truth. And that's one of those things that I always feel like is really interesting when you talk about the study of mythology. But Java itself is going to become very famous even outside of India, much like Borneo. The Chinese, I believe, have their own kind of language and travelogues talking about the island, just like they do with Borneo. But I believe that the Greeks and the Romans were aware of Java as well. They at least heard of it and had stories about them, which I don't know that they had any about Borneo. I'm not familiar with Borneo showing up in any Greek or Roman sources. I guess it's possible it could have, but its name wouldn't have been anything like that. But yeah, I think that's a good place to stop for now. So, just to kind of summarize, the descendants of the Hohaubian, group, or the predecessors to the Hohaubian. They were, they were all very closely related. They occupied Sundaland. They were probably, right in between India and Australia in terms of migration route. But once the seas started to rise, you see them get cut off for each other for a time. You have these small isolated groups begin to develop a lot more radically from each other. And then it kind of sets the stage for travel and trade to reappear, again, probably in the next 3,000 years or so, if not sooner, that's going to start happening. And then after that, you will have a period of migration into the region from either East Asia or from islands to the north, Taiwan, the Philippines, that sort of area. And then, of course, that mainly happens in mainland Southeast Asia, and then on the islands you have these maritime groups coming from, again, what is probably Taiwan, probably the Philippines, and then later the groups from the southern or South Asia will begin to move into both regions, and then there's a back and forth between these groups that had settled in the region before this kind of South Asian interaction, and they are having to deal with expansionist neighbors to the north and to the west, and then of course they all have their own interactions with each other, and between island to island, tribe to tribe, and that's going to make it very complicated to dive into all of this later. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking to give a nice deep dive in this situation. It's a region I'm not quite as familiar with until later, and even in the parts that I am more familiar with, it's not quite as clear to me. So I do look forward to kind of studying this and sharing what I've found, and hoping that you guys will enjoy it as well. But yeah, so next week we will be diving into East Asia, and we'll be talking about some of the groups that are about to start migrating south and on the islands. So I hope you look forward to that. And then once we finish up with East Asia, we'll talk about kind of the Asian steppe, North Asia, and then we'll return to Australia, and then we will go to Europe, and from there into the Americas. So we're getting close, but East Asia should take a couple episodes to get through. So not quite done with season 3 just yet, but we are making good progress. Now I do need to kind of go over the schedule. I have some stuff coming up on the week of the 25th. I have some stuff that prior weekend. I should be able to have an episode out for you guys, a regular one. But if not, you may have a couple of bonus episodes back to back, because that next week is the July 4th kind of super weekend, for lack of a better term. The July 4th is on a Tuesday this year. I will be out of town starting that Thursday, and I will return that Tuesday afternoon. But I am going to try to have a nice little bonus episode recorded ahead of time. Topic will be a surprise, but it's not going to be a serious academic topic. It's going to be one of my review topics. So I hope you look forward to that. I haven't done one of those since October, and I'm kind of looking forward to something a little less intellectually challenging for that, and I hope you guys enjoy. But so there might be a brief, serious episode delay at the end of this month, start of next. But I'll have something for you guys, something for you to chew on. And July's a long month. There will be 5 episodes then. So yeah, thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, any feedback, constructive criticism, please let me know. You can reach me at waratRevPod@gmail.com, or you can contact me via direct message on Twitter. My DMs are open, and then you can also comment on any of the YouTube videos, and I will respond there. And please feel free to like, subscribe, whatever you do on whatever site you listen to. I am looking to kind of get these numbers up. It's still been a very successful year so far. Far more successful than I thought possible when I started this. I was stunned when I got 1,000 downloads in my first year, and we're already looking forward to smashing that number if things keep going the way they've been going. So I want to thank you all so much for listening. But yeah, you have a great day and a great rest of your week. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.